Good morning. You know, I'm not very good at impersonations, but since we're in another Tuesday in the election cycle, I feel compelled to tell you that digital transformation is going to be huge. It's really fantastic. It's the best business strategy ever you'll see. Yeah. Okay, enough of that. What I wanted to start with is to address the two most common questions I get about digital transformation. The first one is this just another fad? Is it just another, trend? And after being a tech buyer for 20 years and the last 15 as an analyst, it's a very legitimate question because I've seen a lot of these come and go. So to frame the answer, I have to let you in on a little bit of a secret of being a research analyst, a little inside baseball, if you will. When you become an analyst, you learn pretty early on, if you're writing a report and you're towards the end, and you need one more piece of guidance to include in that report, and you're not quite sure what to say, you should say, get executive support, because it's never wrong, right? If you have a CEO's approval of a technology project, your probability of success goes way up. So it was in that spirit, I went to look, what are CEOs saying about digital transformation? And I was very pleased. I found dozens of relevant quotes. My favorite, probably because it's very concise, comes from the CEO of Citi. And he was speaking, and by the way, he was speaking at Mobile World Congress. He wasn't speaking at an industry event. And he said that Citi is no longer a bank. We're a technology company in the financial services industry. And this is a theme we see repeated amongst the CEOs. And it's not limited to geographies or industries, as you can see from this slide. But it sort of raised another question with me. So where are they seeing the opportunity? Because let's face it, since about 2008, we've been on kind of a treadmill economy, right? So we're working hard, but we're not making a lot of progress. There isn't a lot of world economic growth. So, these CEOs have gotten really good at managing the treadmill. It's largely thanks to second platform investments in things like ERP, because they have unprecedented visibility to their financial position, so they're able to react faster. So they maintain profit margins. They generate a lot of cash. And in fact, the companies that make up the S&P 500 are sitting on over $1 trillion of cash. What are they using the cash for? Well, you see it in the financial press, right? I do stock buybacks, I increase my dividends, I make acquisitions, so I keep the stock price propped up, but I'm not really using that cash for real growth. So this is where we see these CEOs seeing opportunities for real growth. But to understand that growth, I have to go to another quote, this time from Warren Buffett. And again, a very concise quote, which is pretty good for a gentleman who writes a 32-page letter to shareholders every year. But he said, and I see my colleague Dan Vesett uses this in presentations all the time on big data. He said that information is the new oil. Very interesting. If you think about oil in defining the economy of the 20th century, the petrol economy, where we had cheap energy and we were able to scale production, create global markets, that was the engine for growth in that century. Going forward, it's going to be about information. That is going to be the digital economy. But it's interesting to understand the differences, right? Because in the petrol economy, the economic growth was related to productivity, but productivity is a simple equation. It's output over input. That was all about the output, right? I was able to increase the output. And from the end of World War II to the end of the century, we see a productivity slope that's incredibly steady and upward. And in fact, wage growth followed that up until about the late 1980s, early 1990s, where a lot of that wage growth benefit shifted to emerging markets. And in the digital economy, it's going to be more about the input side of the productivity equation. So let's take healthcare, for example. Healthcare is 16% of GDP in the US. And if you think about the potential that Frank showed you for connected patients and the application of cognitive and advanced analytics, what if we could make that so efficient we could cut that percentage in half? Or you look at, if you look at energy, 60% of the energy that gets generated is never used. 60% of the food that gets produced is never consumed. Sorry, thank you. The way we deliver education services, the way we deliver government services, the retail and manufacturing supply chains, we think that there's $20 trillion of opportunity in what I call the social efficiency dividend from the application of these technologies. So $20 trillion is actually 25% of global GDP. So over the next 3 to 5 years, we have the opportunity for 25% growth. That's what the CEOs are seeing. And it's important to note that, that digital transformation is a business strategy. It's not a technology investment. And that's what that's where the mandate comes from. Now, interestingly, if you think about consumer spending in the petrol economy, with the wage growth, the increased disposable income, people bought conveniences, right? They bought appliances, they bought automobiles, they bought televisions. In the digital economy, with a lower cost of living of the essentials, people aren't going to buy more conveniences, they're going to buy experiences. And one executive told me that it's like going from being a rock musician to a jazz musician. Right? I don't get it, what do you mean? He said, well, a rock musician plays 3 chords for 3,000 or more people, and a jazz musician plays 3,000 chords for 3 or fewer people. So these executives are trying to become jazz musicians, tailoring the experiences for individual customers. And the only way you're going to do that is by applying these technologies to make it happen. So the second most popular question I get is, how do you define digital transformation? And at the high level, it's the application of third platform technologies to improve all aspects of society, that social efficiency dividend, if you will, quite aspirational. But for business, it means some very specific things. First, it's about real transformation. It's about creativity and innovation. It's about becoming that jazz musician. It's not just investing in technology to modernize what I already have. What are we really transforming? We're really transforming decision making. So someone told me that innovation it's not the aha moment, it's not the light bulb going off. That is invention. Innovation is about learning, a company's ability to process information and learn from it, to become cognitive, to have an evidence-based culture. So it's about transforming decision making. And as I said, it's really not possible without the technology. We need these third platform technologies to create the capability. This isn't a parallel technology investment to business strategy. This is technology as the business strategy. So having answered the 2 most popular questions, I'd like to share some research with you that we've conducted on digital transformation. I want to cover first 3 areas of mastery. We've done a lot of maturity research that Frank shared with you. And we've identified these 3 areas of mastery. We'll go through those. We'll look at 3 trends that are driving this spending, including what that spending looks like. And then we'll share with you some of how the buying organizations are approaching that spending, how are they organizing and thinking about it. And then I'll leave you with some guidance. And we'll see if I have to get executive support or not with that guidance. So the first mastery is mastery of relationships, creating those experiences. So you can see it's part that leadership that I talked about, that CEO mandate, but it's also that need to create new experiences. And if we align relationship management with the platforms, in the first platform, we really were looking for reach in our relationships. We wanted brand awareness. We wanted to reach mass markets. In the second platform, we had moved more to relevancy. How can we be important to certain customer segments? It was brand preference. And the third platform, as we move there, it's going to be about reciprocity. It's about having a conversation with your customers, letting them shape your products and services as part of that process. It's about brand immersion or brand experience, or perhaps, to use Frank's terms, brand intimacy, right? That's what you're trying to create. So let's kind of bring this notion to life with an example of a company that I think has been doing a good job of this mastery of relationships, and that's Lego. Now, you may be familiar, who's familiar with the Mindstorm product? Familiar with that, people with kids? So Mindstorm was a Lego product that was essentially the ability to build robotics, simple robotics with Legos. And I think it's been out 10 years now or so, maybe a little bit less than that. But when they first released it, coders started to hack the kernel of the embedded system. So the first thing Lego did is they picked up the phone, called the lawyers, our intellectual property is under attack. And at some point in that process, the CEO said, well, wait a minute, maybe that's not such a bad thing. What if we just open the whole thing up to as many developers as we possibly can? They can start to make the product better. And that's exactly what happened. And it really started Lego on a, journey, a path to blending the physical and the digital to create really unique customer experiences. And if you have kids, you've probably seen the Lego movies more times than you would like to admit to. But that's an example of how they're augmenting the physical with the media. Now, there is a product that Lego had called Fusion. And the idea of Fusion is you build something with Legos, you take the picture with an iPad, you change the structure, and you take another picture, you essentially build your own movie. It's a colossal failure, right? Because it turns out that making a stop-action animation is a very tedious process, and most children do not have the patience to do it. So why am I sharing with you a failure at Lego? Because I think another hallmark of what we see in more mature, digitally transformed companies is a willingness to publicly experiment. And they don't fear failure. So Lego took that failure and they used it as a learning. And that's really an important example of that. Now, one more thing on Lego. I want you all to imagine yourselves, you're the CEO of Lego. And now you've just seen a 3D printer for the first time. Talk about an oh no moment, right? I could use saltier language, but let's stick with oh no moment, right? Because here you are, here's a machine that prints little plastic shapes, and you're in the little plastic shape business. So what do you do? Well, I think interesting, they haven't said much publicly, except that they did receive a patent on a particular kind of 3D printer. And I would speculate that what you'll see from Lego is their own branded 3D printer, as well as an ability to download designs to be printed that are extensions of the kits. Another thing that they might do, if you have kids, you'll appreciate this. You buy one of these kits, like a Star Wars kit, and there's a lot of common parts, but there's that one unique part. And which part is the one that your kid loses? Is that one unique part? They call it the Murphy's Law of Legos. But imagine having the ability to 3D print that one missing piece so that you still have a complete kit. So I'm sure Lego is going to address that in a very unique and customer-friendly way. Now, mastering relationships really doesn't get you anywhere unless you have the ability to execute on the promises that you're making. And that's where we get to the second mastery, which is mastery of operations. And if we look at the history of the platforms, in the first platform, it was about scale, not scale in Frank's terms, but scale in that I wanted to be able to consistently produce a product or a service that was cost competitive. And then in the second platform, operations started to be more about scope. So how can I reach a certain set of customers? How can I be relevant in a geography operationally? And in the third platform, it's really going to be about speed. As I'm having this conversation with the customer, as I'm trying to jam as a jazz musician, how quickly can I adjust and adapt the operations to the market need? And there's one of my favorite digital companies, of course, is Apple. And I don't know if you want to make the correlation, but depending on which quarter it is, they're either the most valuable company in the world or the second most valuable company in the world. But Tim Cook, before he became CEO, he was VP of supply chain at Apple. And he used to hand out a book to his direct reports called Competing Against Time. And at Apple, there's a real sense of the importance of speed. And in fact, you can get from what I understand, you can get an investment justified at Apple, not necessarily on a financial return, but on a return on time if you can speed things up. So speed is absolutely critical. But to give you an example of this master of operations, because it really requires you to completely transform your operating model, and you also have to rethink about how you source work. We think the employer-employee relationship starts to diminish, and it's more of a Uberization of the workforce. I'm going to locate the right skill at the right time and use it only for as long as I need it. And a good example of this is Local Motors. And I'm cheating a little bit here, because this is a company that didn't transform. They were sort of born digital. But if you're not familiar with them, they're an automotive company who they don't employ very many engineers directly, but they have a community of engineers that work on developing automobiles, and they bring the designers in on specific projects. So they had a challenge. They wanted to do a 3D printed car in 12 months. Now, if you're not familiar with the automotive industry, it's an industry where 3 years is considered a fast cycle on a new product development. So they beat their goal. They had a 3D printed car, 97% 3D printed in 11 months. Now, will this car pass National Highway Transportation Safety Board requirements to be roadworthy? Probably not. You're probably not going to see them on the road anytime soon. But it was an amazing achievement for a company that was so light in terms of having direct engineers. Now, the next thing that Local Motors did was quite interesting. Peterbilt, you familiar with Peterbilt, the truck manufacturer? They came to Local Motors and said, we need a whole new redesign on the cab of our truck, and we'd like to plug into your community to do it. And they did. The Local Motors community did a wonderful job. Peterbilt was hugely happy with the result. But the one interesting part of that story to me is Peterbilt was really concerned that their existing engineers, many of whom with the company 20, 25 years, that they would alienate them as part of the process. And what they found was the exact opposite, that plugging into this community of people with other ideas outside of the 20-year veterans really re-energized their own engineering group. So it was a really interesting result to me. And then one last thing on Local Motors, GE Appliances came to them and said, we need an induction cooker. I'm not handy in the kitchen, so I don't know exactly what an induction cooker is. Perhaps someone can tell me. But GE needed one, and they needed one in their product line. And they went to Local Motors, which is another interesting element, because now their operating model is about the design community, not necessarily about automotive, because this has nothing to do, it has no adjacency to automobiles at all. And they designed this induction cooker. They used the community to do it. And it was, again, another very successful product, this time for GE. So it's this notion of transforming the operating model, transforming how work is sourced. And the third area of mastery is information. And again, if we walk through the platforms, first platform, when a company thought about information, it was about syntax. What's the rules about the information that I have? And the second platform, it became more about semantics. What's the meaning of the information that I have? I have content repositories, and I apply search engines, and I build data warehouses. All I'm trying to do is find the meaning in the information. And in the third platform, it's going to be about the socialization. How can I get that information in the right people's hands who need it? Because what's interesting in the digital economy versus the petrol economy, the petrol economy was about resources. And with resources, as you use them, you draw down the value, right? Because you're using them up. And in the digital economy with information, it's an economy not of scarcity, but of abundance. The more I use the information, the more valuable it gets. So your goal here with information is to socialize it and to monetize it. Now, the example I'll share here is Schindler. If you're not familiar with Schindler, they're in the people-moving business, elevator systems, the old industry joke, business is up and down. Yeah, I know, you can groan. But they had a project where they took one of their elevator systems, they added a bunch of sensors, they made sure they had geolocation in the mobile devices for their mobile field workers. They gave access to where the mobile service guys were, to the building owners. And ultimately what they did was they reduced the time it takes to repair from 27 hours to 7 hours. And by the way, 30% of those repairs, up from 0, were fixing things before they broke. So they were using predictive analytics. Tremendous, tremendous improvement in the customer experience for the Schindler customer. Although we're seeing a lot of IoT investment, we're seeing a lot of smart connected product projects, and I don't mean to be complacent about it, but we're seeing a lot of these examples. So what's more interesting to me is what Schindler did next. Schindler created an application that could read through tenants' calendaring systems with their permission and start to optimize where the elevator cars were, because the normal optimization procedure with an elevator system is to send them to the ground floor, because that's likely where most of the people are going to be. But by getting an advanced look at the traffic pattern within a building, they were able to adjust where those cars were and increase service levels. Now, is this going to be another Lego Fusion? Is this going to be a hugely successful project? I don't know, but it's a really interesting extension of the experience that some building owners really like, because many rents are driven by service levels to some extent. And not to sound like a late night television commercial, but wait, there's more. The next thing Schindler did is probably the most interesting. They realized that they move 1 billion people a day on their equipment. And they have all this data. So they started to put it together and aggregate it into models about traffic patterns, and they started to sell it to architects and city planners, and they've created a whole new revenue stream around the information. And that's what I'm talking about with the socialization and the monetization. Schindler did a really excellent job of achieving that in this context. So you've seen these elements in the mastery of relationships. We talked about the leadership and changing the experience. In mastery of operations, we talked about work sourcing and transforming the operating model, and obviously the mastery of information. And these 5 elements actually come together to create what we did as our first piece of research in digital transformation, which was to create a maturity model that consists of these 5 dimensions. Now, each of these 5 dimensions then has 3 to 5 dimensions attached to it, and each of those 3 to 5 dimensions has 3 to 5 elements. So the main point here is this maturity model is quite robust. Over 100 elements involved in evaluating the maturity. It's been a very popular product with both our technology buying clients and our vendor clients. But of course, once you've got the model, what you want to do next is to do some primary research to figure out how mature people are against the model, and that's what we did. And you saw this in Frank's slides as well, where 64% of organizations are either at stage 2 or stage 3. And I think the important point for me is that this is indicative of a market that's about to take off. What you see is enough maturity that there's momentum, but enough runway left in this that there's a lot of market left to go after. So let's come back and connect some dots, take a pause before we look at what the spending looks like in digital transformation. The first key trend to be aware of course, is it's a board level initiative. We talked about that at the opening. It's a CEO mandate. Now, when the CEO has a strategy, they don't necessarily go to IT to get it done, right? They're going to go to their line of business. They're going to go to their marketing people. You need to support this digital transformation strategy. They're going to go to their operations people. They're going to go to their sales, et cetera. It's going to be very much a line of business influenced market. You're going to see a lot of spending through the line of business. But they will be built on the third platform technologies. I'm old enough to remember having worked in IT in the first platform, and thank you, Frank, for the dinosaur reference on that. But So in those days, you defined your IT organization by the hardware that you ran, right? I ran Digital Equipment Corp. hardware where I was, so I was a DEC shop. I might have had a peer at another company that was an IBM shop or an HP shop, et cetera. But what happened in those days was DEC came in and told me, you have to run our network protocol on our network equipment. You have to use our terminals. You have to use our storage. And oh, you want to do ERP? And we called it MRP. If you want to do ERP, here's 5 vendors that run on the VAX. Those are your choices. So everything was controlled through that relationship. In the second platform, the client-server era, we moved more to a software-centric IT shop. So I was an SAP shop, an Oracle shop, a Bond shop. And you sort of defined your IT organization by that. And the tables kind of turned, right? You had to get hardware that was certified by the software vendor. In the third platform, we think IT is going to be defined in a services-centric way, but not services like Accenture or Deloitte. There's a huge opportunity, obviously, in digital transformation for services. But the IT organization is going to define themselves around the platform as a service that they run. We really think that a lot of this market will coalesce around a set of mega platforms, Oracle, Salesforce, SAP, IBM, Google, Microsoft, Amazon. These folks, IT shops will gravitate because there'll be a cost of ownership benefit of using that foundation. And if you're not one of those mega platforms, you need to think about how do you have a relationship with one of those mega platforms, because those are the companies that are going to make the market in digital transformation. And I even think you might even see some interesting financial transactions. You know, the finance guys have a concept called sale leaseback, usually for buildings or assets. I think you'll see the SaaS vendors that have successful application products on the cloud, but they run their own infrastructure. They will sell that infrastructure to one of the mega platform providers and then lease it back from them. They'll get cash to invest into their application, and the mega platforms will get even more scale on the infrastructure. I think you're going to start to see those deals, and I think you're going to start to see these mega platforms really emerge as, if not complete fidelity to those platforms, IT shops giving them a strong preference. So what does the spending look like? We just released about a month and a half ago our first digital transformation spending guide. And what we wanted to do was size the market by each one of those dimensions in the maturity model. And what you can see last year, based on the spending, almost half of it is in operating model transformation, which makes sense because if I'm smart, before I try to change the experience, I need to make sure my operations are going to be able to deliver on that promise. So we're seeing that investment up front. A lot of IoT, as you might imagine. You'll hear from Vernon later talking about some of that. But what's interesting to me as we move this forecast out and look at 2020, you can see the market starts to shift towards the middle, and a third of the spending is now in information. So as we become more information-based enterprises and as we start to look to monetize the information we have, you'll see more and more investment gravitate towards that center pillar. But companies aren't necessarily going to buy based on those 6 pillars, 5 dimensions of our maturity model. They're not going to buy leadership. They're not going to operating model initiatives. We believe that they're going to buy around 3 architectural constructs. One is going to be the modernization of their system of record. I talked about the treadmill economy and how investment in ERP helped to maintain margins and generate cash. Well, I think in the digitally transformed world, in the digital economy, the system of record has to keep up with the changes. And in fact, I think the role of the CFO, the digital CFO, is going to be very different from the previous CFO. The existing CFO function is more of a scorekeeper. I aggregate all the information. I produce the financial reports. I keep score for the company. I think in the future, it's going to be much more of active coach. Because if you think if I have to be this jazz musician and I have to do all these separate little ventures, I need someone providing guidance on the financial implications of my decisions in a much more rapid, iterative way. So we see the CFO changing, and in order to do that, we're going to have to modernize that system of record. But really where most of the action is going to be is in this concept of an innovation platform. So Frank talked about this continuous sensing and collective learning. That's what the line of business wants to build. They want to have instrumented and intelligent every node of the supply chain, every product that I've ever sold. My marketing is continuously sensing, and I'm learning from that. So what the line of business wants is this digital twin, this representation of the supply chain or the products or the markets. And it's essentially I think of it as a DVR functionality, right? I can rewind to see what happened. So that's kind of what was past performance. I can play to see what's happening. And I can fast forward to see what might happen, right? Using predictive analytics, I can do scenario analysis, but I want that all in a single platform that's being continuously fed data and continuously analyzed. That's what the line of business is going to want to buy. And then the third construct will be industry clouds. And Frank covered this in some detail, and I would encourage you to attend Eric Newmark's session on industry clouds. But what I wanted to say about them is I think ultimately this becomes a source of monetization for companies. It'll be very, very important for the participants, because think about the Schindler example I gave you. So Schindler had to take all that information about the people that they move, and they had to go to the potential buyers directly. They had to have a direct sales force to do that, or at least a channel. But think if there was an industry cloud for architecture, and now I can put that data on that cloud and sell through. This becomes a very important channel if I'm going to be partly in the information business and I'm going to create these new revenue streams. So that's the other area where we see a lot of investment is industry clouds. And it's really the whole ecosystem coming together, as Frank described, to innovate. So I talked about the CFO, I talked about the line of business, and I talked about the ecosystem, but I didn't talk about the IT organization anywhere. And so what I like to tell people is, if you think, going back to Apple, who I said was one of my favorite digital companies, if you think about Apple, the IT organization didn't build iTunes, they didn't build the App Store, but they run the infrastructure that those products run on, and they do a great job. And when Apple went to streaming, the infrastructure kept right up with it. So they are an important ingredient and part of the digital operations of Apple. And in fact, because they're so good at what they do, they get invited to contribute to the innovation process. So to me, that's interesting, because we went out, because it's such a line of business market, we went out and did some primary research, and we asked the line of business leaders a whole set of questions about technology. One of them was, what do you think the role of IT is? And that's the data you're seeing on the screen. And by the way, they were only allowed to choose one. So what you're seeing is 80% of the respondents on that slide. And the bottom two are what you might expect, right? Project management and technology selection. It's what we traditionally think of IT for. But the number one choice, as you can see, is innovation. So much like the Apple example, the line of business wants IT to help them innovate. And what's important to you, if you're a technology vendor and you've traditionally sold into the IT organization, you're going to have to help that IT organization demonstrate that value and get introduced to the line of business and help with that innovation process. So you can see that's the fourth point of guidance I have, is help the IT organization. But in order to bring that to its full conclusion, you really have to know the business and the industry. Digital transformation, as we said, is very industry use case specific. So if you don't understand it, you're going to be lost. You need to learn how to talk to the line of business. And they're looking for purpose, not solutions. They want that innovation platform. And if you do all that, you then need to bring strategies, not just products, to the clients. Because this, to repeat my opening statement, this is a business strategy, not a technology investment. So I'd like to leave you with one last thought. I like to joke that my daughter did a search several years ago for most expensive sport for my parents to support. And you can see she found equestrian eventing. But actually, in all seriousness, I'm very proud of her. And she would tell you that success in her sport is know the course, trust the horse, and have the courage to make the leap. So when it comes to digital transformation, you should use your time here at Directions to understand your plan, trust the technology, and have the courage to make the leap. Thank you very much.